Oh, you start. I've been translated.
Yes, I
They're a thief. Oh, they're a thief. I'm going to tell them. $4 on the internet.
You're
Yes,
okay?
since you want.
That's not enough. Thank you.
Okay, it wasn't very encouraging.
I consider himself a Mr. Dixon, so. Wonderful meeting you. It's a great opportunity. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Great, thanks.
I knew Gabe Moran by reputation long before I met him. When we finally did meet, I was most impressed not by what Gabe said, but by how attentively he listened to what others had to say. It has often been my experience, and one of life's many ironies, that those with the most to say usually seem to do most of the listening. The ability to listen may in fact be the quintessential attribute of an open mind. When Gabe does speak, he speaks as he writes, in simple, concise, declarative sentences. He dismantles complexity into its conceptual components, allowing the listener to reconstruct, in his or her own way, the puzzle of the complex whole. Gabe's clarity of thought and openness of mind had immunized him against what G.K. Chesterton once defined as heresy. Heresy is truth gone mad from loneliness. Gabe's truth is not lonely. It has been shared in 28 books, which, without doubt, were conceived after a lot of listening. Congratulations, Gabe, on being and exemplifying what it means to be a great teacher.
My memory of that first meeting with Gabriel is not extensive, but some details remain vivid to me. I recall his kind manner and his attentive listening as I shared how I wanted to do my dissertation on the religious elements of Malcolm X's story. As Gabriel and I talked, my eyes drifted to the bookcase near his desk in the small departmental office where we met. Suddenly I glimpsed the copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X on one of the shelves. More importantly, when I shared my intentions with him, immediately he was both instructive and encouraging, and he proved to be a wonderful advisor, both discerning and knowledgeable. In fact, it was his idea to build my dissertation around two moments in Malcolm's religious life, his two conversions, first to the Nation of Islam and then to traditional or Sunni Islam. Of course, as his student, I had enjoyed the great privilege to sit in Gabriel's classes throughout my coursework at NYU. As a teacher, he was always thoughtful, engaging, and open to his students. He would tell them from the onset that anything was permitted in class except violence. And the liberty of learning was fully manifested in his classroom without exception. He listened to and understood his students, all of them, from a rebellious dissenting evangelical like me to a Syrian Muslim, and even a Wiccan, if I recall correctly. What impressed me was the knowledgeable and sensitive manner in which he connected with us, both as a class and as individual students. He was never put off by what he heard, and he always had something to offer his students. To me, especially then, when I had recently discovered Henry Nouwen, Gabriel was that compassionate person that Nouwen writes about in The Wounded Healer, to whom, quote, nothing human is alien, no joy, no sorrow, no way of living, and no way of dying. Following those days at NYU, first in the pastorate and then as a seminary instructor, I have been privileged to enjoy friendship with Gabriel Moran. And now I suppose we have been friends longer than I was his student in school. But every occasion to sit with him, to talk with him about everything from religion and history to politics and Donald Trump is still a learning experience for me. Gabriel's monumental scholarship and commentary, his depth and skill as a curator of words and their meanings, his expansive knowledge of history, philosophy, and so on are inseparable from his great compassion for humanity and his passion for justice.
Along the way, I realized that this is not number 27, but I think it's number, we're coming to that. Gabriel, number 28.
What do you say of Gabriel Moran? What do you say of a teacher who marked a turning point in your thinking? When the questions became as important, more important than the answers. What do you say of an author whose vision is so broad and deep that its challenge takes time to understand, its truth, to some, too frightening, its prophecy, too incomprehensible? What do you say of a friend who quietly stands by his community of friends in times of need, sorrow, and loss? What do you say of an author whose discipline and commitment last 50 years, bringing to completion a work that calls us to change our thinking, to vision anew our country, to take a more truthful view of our place in the world? Simply, thank you. Thank you for sharing your thinking, questions, and vision, your commitment to truth, your daring to prophesy. Thank you for your faithful and compassionate friendship. Thank you for a work well done.
Thank you very much, Pat. I'd like to read what I say. At the age of 29, this wonder kid had published 3 books. He would go on to write 25 others. Students of religion, especially with those strong ties to the Roman Catholic Church, came from all over the English-speaking world: Canada, Australia, Kenya, New Zealand, Ireland, United Kingdom, as well as from all corners of the United States. Willing disciples, they sat at his feet and in this classroom of this wonder kid, Dr. Gabriel Moran. I was one of them. But something else happened between us. We would be friends, colleagues, co-cooks, co-chefs, blueberry pies, for most of his life. We have shared the triumphs, the joys, the sorrows. It's the unknown part of Gabriel's personality that I'm sharing with you. First off, in 64 years, I have never seen him angry at anyone ever. Disappointed, yes, and sometimes forceful in that disappointment. But he often understood the motivations of his so-called enemies, and he showed me God. You can see him every Monday night serving at the NYU Catholic Center, the soup kitchen. He did not lord it over the needy, but his most hidden and endearing quality is his compassion. This is a little tough. At age 65, his wife Maria revealed symptoms of Lewy body disease. A form of dementia, Lewy body disease, also involves weakness of movement. The patience, the love, caring Gabriel showed for her were remarkable. And when my own wife died at 52, Gabriel and Maria invited me to their home in Montauk. It was just perfect. A beautiful home in the Atlantic Ocean. This stay gave me the chance to grieve and recover. I made frequent journeys to Montauk, so their guest quarters began to be called Tony's room. I am proud that I have known intimately this man of many amazing parts, and for me, Gabriel especially, his soft-spoken kindness and his almost universal compassion. Thank you, Gabriel.
First, I would like to thank Tony for the opportunity to speak at this auspicious occasion. 50 years ago, when I was an Adrian Dominican, I received my appointment for the coming year. It read, "You will be the religious ed director at a parish in Rochester, Michigan." Up to that point, I had been an elementary school teacher for over 8 years. As with many assignments we received, I was totally unprepared. And I had 1 month to get ready. I began by reading and rereading Gabe's first books, Theology of Revelation, Catechesis of Revelation, Vision, and Tactics. Somehow I survived, and I think Gabe's books were a big part of that survival. The following year, I was asked by the directors of study if I wished to go on and get a degree in religious studies, and where would I like to go. I responded, anywhere in the world, and she said yes. I said, Manhattan College, because that's where Gabe Moran is. After all, I had read practically all of your books. The word I would use to describe my year at Manhattan and in Gabe's program was awakening. Like many Catholics of the 40s and the 50s, I believed that Revelation was over. It was simply our job to look back and figure out what had happened. It was not what God is and will be revealing. It was life-changing for me, as I'm sure it was for many in this room. It changed the way I looked at myself, the way I looked at other people, and the way I looked at the world. It is empowering to become an active participant in Revelation rather than an observer. This is one of the many gifts that I received from Gabe. In preparing for tonight, I read up on the many accolades, awards that Gabe has received. And I must say I was hard-pressed to come up with something new, but I think I have. It is with overwhelming gratitude that I present Gabe Moran with this award, and I will read it. This says, Lifetime Achievement Award, Gabriel Moran, Rock Star of Revelation.
Dr. Moran, come forward with you here locally.
That's great.
I'll make 5 brief remarks on this book.
I'll answer any questions if anybody has a question. And then one extended thank you before we get to the meal. Of these 28 books that you've heard I've written, published actually, more than 28 that I've written, I have a special place for this one. Not only because it's the longest title, and because I designed the cover, which is the first time I ever designed a cover. But it's also, I always felt it would be the last book I would write, if I could write it at all. As many of you in this room know, I've been interested in this, some would say obsessed by this, for 50 years or so. But I could never figure out how to write it. And I'm not an historian, I don't pretend to be an historian. So I did figure out some way of doing this, in which I say in the first chapter, I'm not trying to discover new things about United States history. I'm asking us to look at what is in front of our eyes. As many of you know, my interest is language, or more exactly, how language affects the way we think. I realized a couple of years ago that all 28 books could have a similar title. And they could all be entitled, What is the Meaning of the Word X? Where X is words like teaching, responsibility, human rights, religious education. Some people find this a very strange way to go about things. I was using this method before I realized I was using this method. My two great teachers for this approach are Thomas Aquinas, the great 13th century philosopher who never ceases to surprise me, and Ludwig Wittgenstein, the 20th century anti-philosopher who never ceases to puzzle me. Like Wittgenstein, I'm interested in having a slow reader, as someone who is willing to go along with me and is willing to try to distinguish between the way the words themselves and what the words supposedly refer to. Publishers don't like this method. This book was turned down by about 25 publishers. I did one book on teaching called Showing How the Art, the Act of Teaching. I consider it the best of the 28 books that I wrote. That was turned down by every educational publisher in the country. When they would say, who would be interested in a book on the meaning of the infinitive to teach? I used to say, well, all human beings at least. The book does cover also non-human animals, but I figured they weren't going to be big book readers. So in the first chapter of this book, I admit and realize and acknowledge that not many people are going to be readers of this book. But I say there's two different ways that people dismiss it, and since the two contradict each other, I figure both of them can't be right. But some people, from my experience, will say, I know that already. Everybody knows that. And then other people say, that's stupid. You know. Any reasonable person would have given up, but I continue to be interested. And I had no success with my colleagues here at NYU. The head of the international education program that I taught in heard me give the same talk about 25 times, and he thought, it's kind of clever and cute, but he never considered that it might influence his own way of speaking. The thing that did interest me, though, was that for the last 30 years or so, almost every year I've spoken to a conference of international professors who come to NYU. And when I bring this up, the distinction between the United States and the dream and the continent of America, I notice every face in the room lights up. they sense a significance, that there's something to this. They may not know exactly what it means, but they do sense that, that there is some significance to what I'm trying to get at. The book essentially consists of quotations that I gathered over the years. And I had enough for a 1,000-page book, but I figured not many people would read that. On the other hand, a 3-page essay doesn't do it. So what I decided upon was a book of this size. And in doing it at this size, I had to at times cut out cherished words. I'm sure all of you have that experience when you write something and you say, yeah, I got to cut it down. There was one point at which I thought my manuscript was finished, and then I had to cut 30,000 words out of it. But I wrote a book of this size because I think I can make my case in this size book. And if people aren't convinced at the end of this book, they're never going to be convinced of what I have to say. So I would ask you, this is my 5th and last point, I would ask you to have the patience to give it a try. Try the introduction and the conclusion. That's the way I often read books. Mm-hmm. And if that's intriguing, then you go to find out what's in between. I would say to some of my friends here who may not agree with me politically, this is not a book of liberal politics. At one stage, I had a lot of quotations in the first chapter from both the political left and the political right. It's not one more president bashing book. Actually, the book was finished about 5 years ago. I did hold it in 2016 for the election. I had a section on Hillary Clinton to add to the end. And after that, actually after the election 2016, I became disabled and I could not do anything for 6 months. And I told the publisher to cancel the project, even though the manuscript was edited. But then I decided I'll give it a try. So I put it together and it was published a few months ago. I say a couple of times in the book that it is not an attack on America, that no one gets anywhere in this country attacking America. That the book is actually a celebration of the United States and of the idea of America, but I never confuse the two. And that I hope that you might give it a read. There's a couple of books left over there if you want, if anyone doesn't have one. That's what I have to say about the book and my coronation here today.
Long live the king! Just before we go, I would like especially to single out Mr. James Casey for his extraordinary work in putting together a booklet which you'll see at the end. Anything else need to be said? No. Hey, God bless you.
Thank you all.
So easy and free.